Warning, the Savage Nation contains adult language, adult content, psychological nudity. Listener discretion is advised. The Westwood One Podcast Network presents The Savage Nation. It's savage, uncut, unfiltered, and raw. Home of borders, language, culture, and here he is, New York Times best-selling author and National Radio Hall of Fame inductee, Michael Savage.
Welcome to today's Savage Podcast, and I'm going to talk about this man-made myths. Are myths true? And I'm going to use the myth of Thanksgiving as one example. I'm going to also talk about the myth of toxic masculinity, which is being pushed by man-hating, anti-family, godless, feminist, fascists in America today. The myth of toxic masculinity. Now, I'm going to have to go back in time to the Salem witch trials. Those of you who know a little bit about American history know about this hysteria. And how it relates to the hysteria against men today in the USA is something I want to do today. Even if some of the accused men admit to guilt, the charge is now being leveled at all men, innocent and guilty alike. And their public hangings, is something to behold. It is like the Salem witch trial hysteria of 1692. Now, the Salem witch trial hysteria of 1692 was fueled by the Puritan strict religious standards and intolerance of anything not accepted by their scriptures. The largest account of witch trials, as well as deaths by witch trials, occurred in Salem, Massachusetts, a village heavily populated by the Puritans. Now, as it turns out, and this is something you probably didn't know, the roots of the witch hunt in 1692 were rivalry, avarice, greed, and intolerance of any doxy outside the Puritan doxy. How does that relate to the persecutions for sexual predatory practices and moral misconduct and persecutions of men in 2017, which are being caused by the strict liberal intolerance of anything outside the scriptures? The current climate allows for accusations to be confirmed as guilty verdicts against the accused without a trial of their peers. And they are surely condemned, the men are today, as were the unfortunates in 1692-93 during the Salem witch trials, which were, although in theory legally codified into hearings, you have to understand there were no hearings. They were a series of prosecutions of people accused mainly by preteen girls of witchcraft, which resulted in the executions of 20 people. They were not the less a public hysterical persecution, which we are again seeing today in the war against men. These were later determined to be persecutions driven by Puritan zealots who were fueled by Reverend Samuel Parris, the initiator, whose daughter started the accusations against anyone she didn't like. And outside their influence, the rival Puritan family, the Porters, tried to organize the villagers against the witch trials. However, they failed, and many of their supporters were then accused of witchcraft. Does that sound familiar? Where today, if anyone in the media says, hey, wait a minute, slow down, this attack upon all men, how do you know they're all guilty? They then suddenly are attacked by the venomous lawyers and media government complex. You think about it. I'm thinking about that. My mind jumped. They said that Eisenhower did it with the secretary. They said FDR was doing the secretary. They said Eleanor was doing a girl. I mean, it's unbelievable. What, it was all sexual harassment? Or was it the human condition? What is this? I mean, let's think back. Every president seems to have had someone on the side. Think about that. JFK, Marilyn Monroe. What, he was a sexual harasser? According to the sex mores of today? You want to disinter JFK now and burn him at the stake? Burn the corpse at the stake because JFK was with Marilyn Monroe. And while you're at it, dig up FDR. Apparently he had with the... Then you had FDR, then you had Eisenhower, another one. The only one I think was not interested outside of his marriage was Truman. He was so sexually frustrated he bombed Japan twice with atomic bombs. So maybe it would have been better if he did... You know what I'm saying? Maybe there wouldn't have been atomic bombing in Japan. Maybe he would have settled with them earlier on some kind of, reasonable grounds instead of incinerating two cities. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, what I'm thinking. Because they say sexual frustration leads to violence. So, make love, not war. I don't know. And maybe it's healthier that they didn't. Maybe it's better that they did. Because when you think about it, JFK was screwing around a lot. He didn't bomb anyone. The guy who wasn't screwing on did bomb. I don't know what the answer to that question is. You have to think it through. Because a lot of sexual oppression leads to ISIS. Look what they did when they took over cities. They were so sexually starved, they raped 8-year-old girls. No one said anything in the women's movement. How did that work out? How come Pelosi and all the big mouths like Hillary said nothing about the 8-year-old girls who were being raped around the clock on an industrial level when ISIS took over? Where were they when we needed them? Nowhere, because they're full of you-know-what. But going back to the Puritans, the property of convicted witches was forfeited to the town Puritans. So not only was this a religious and political persecution, the roots of the Salem witch hunt were deep in avarice and greed. You know, you talk about religious Jews, you know that they don't let a woman will not shake your hand. If you go in a religious Jewish community and you like normally don't know, you reach out to shake, they won't shake your hand. They say, no, it's not in our culture. They were ahead of their time by thousands of years. You can't touch their hand. Well, look at the Chinese, the ancient Chinese, they shook their own hand. You know, that was for disease. You had to shake a Chinese hand, let's say, hundreds of years ago. They shook their own hand, like, They bowed forward and shook their own hands. Why? They didn't want to touch your dirty hand. They didn't know if you just wiped yourself or touched a dirty vegetable somewhere, or a mouse, or hitched up your shoe. So they didn't touch your hand. Maybe we should go back to not shaking hands in this society. I hate handshaking to begin with. The reason I hate handshaking is not because of the filth. That's number one. You know, hygiene's a big deal, and people don't recognize this. You know how dirty things are in your society? Everywhere you turn, filth. I know this is psychologically very threatening. I'm a hand washer. People mock hand washers. But you know what? Get back to me when you're my age. I'm telling you that hygiene is the number one way to stay alive. I incessantly wash my hands. If I go in a restaurant, forget about it. I wash my hands before I sit down. I come out like a surgeon. I'm one of those guys who goes in the toilet. I'm not alone. I see the paper on the floor. They even have a can down next to the door. You wash like a surgeon, hands up. The trick is to get the paper out of the toilet paper dispenser without touching the metal. Because the minute you touch the metal to get the paper, if it's like in too far, bingo, you're contaminated. You have to go back to the washing stand. So you wash, you go to the thing, you pull out the paper very, very gingerly, you wipe the hands, right? Now, follow my take. I know I'm not alone on this. Now you got a big challenge to get back to your table to eat the bread or whatever without touching a thing. So the first challenge is, how do you get out of the bathroom without touching a door? That's simple. A foot, a knee. What do you think God gave you a knee or a foot for? It wasn't to bow down to hate America. You use your knee to open the door. Now you're still stuck with the paper in your hand. So you don't throw it on the floor like a pig. The good restaurants now have a can there near the door for the men to throw. So now you got another challenge to get back to the table without touching. And what if you meet a schmuck on the way back to your table? Hey, Bill, how are you? And they want to shake your hand. Now you're stuck. Because the minute you shake Bill's hand, you got to go back in the bathroom and start the hand washing again. So I'm advising you that if Bill wants to shake your hand after you just washed him before sitting down in the restaurant, you got to say, hi, Bill, I have pneumonia. I don't want to shake your hand, or something like that. Tell him you have, like, the flu. No, you got to get out of it. Like, you can't shake the hand. That's it, just a simple, hygiene is very important. And now, my friends, you know the rest of the savage story. And isn't it the savage truth today? Isn't it a savage truth today that the myth of toxic masculinity is being pushed by man-hating, anti-family, godless, feminist fascists? Is that not the truth? Irrespective that some of the men may be, quote, guilty of some of the accusations, have they had a trial? The only thing left is for their property to be seized. That's all that's left. But what else is a myth? How many myths are true? We need myth, by the way. I'm a former anthropologist along the road in my graduate degrees. I have to hide it when you have construction workers who were bullies who never graduated high school in the media. I mean, I have to be ashamed of my higher degrees, I guess. When you have someone who is simply a bully with a hard hat, pretending to be a family values conservative, I guess it's an embarrassment to say that you actually have 3 higher degrees. But I guess I should be embarrassed and tell you I'm not a construction worker, although I have nothing against construction workers. I detest those who pose with hard hats because their minds are harder than their hats, and their hearts are even harder than their hats, and yet they pretend to be so fair-minded. Well, I can give you the myth of the conservative movement if you'd like. You want me to go there? How about the myth of conservatives in the media, who are all holier than thou? One is more sanctimonious than the other. How about that myth? That they're all friends, and they all share, and they're all fair-minded. That's the biggest myth of all. One thing I will say about liberals is they are what they say they are. They don't make any bones about it. They love sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and they don't hide it. The part about the conservative myth that bothers me the most is that all of these construction worker hard hats are phonies through and through. It's all a myth about them being good and better than the left. They're not better and they're not gooder. Not in the case of the hard hat. He's perfect. The hard hat people are perfect in conservative media. They're the perfect people. Pure as the driven snow, not greedy, not avaricious. Sharing with friends, open door policies. That's the mythology. Meanwhile, it's a giant cartel. So you need the myth. You need the myth that the conservative is better than the liberal. That's the myth that you people have bought. You actually believe that the conservative values that you believe are being practiced by the preachers of conservatism are superior to liberal values. Well, the values may be superior, but are the people who are preaching them superior to the liberal preachers of liberal values? Aha. Well, I'll let God judge that because I'm not God. I don't judge other men. Not much. You know a man who doesn't judge another man? Let me know who it might be. I would say if you can find a man that does not judge another man, especially in the media, that would be rarer than a man entering the kingdom of heaven through the eye of a camel's behind or something like that, whatever the myth was. The needle, I don't remember. Jesus said it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven. What a communist he was. You know what a communistic statement that is to say it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven? Man, that was blasphemous. That was worse than Karl Marx. I don't believe that's true, by the way. I mean, I learned a long time ago that poor people are generally the meanest people on earth because they have nothing, and so they'll fight over anything. It's only people with money who could actually do good on earth. They could do more good than those with no money. They can spread it around and do some good things. So this whole idea that if you're rich, you're evil, and if you're poor, you're good is nonsense. I knew that from my years in San Francisco's, let us say, North Beach community, where all of the phonies reside, collecting the SSI crazy checks, hating America, hating God, hating Los Angeles, hating Hollywood. Well, you know the whole story. If a dollar flew by the cafe, they'd break their necks jumping for that dollar, jumping over each other's necks to go for that dollar, wherever it was, while putting down capitalism. You find it today in all commie quarters, no matter where it may be. So money is certainly a universal, let us say, honey. Money is the universal honey, but it doesn't mean that if you have a lot of this honey that you're evil. It doesn't mean you got it because you stole it from anyone. Some people make a lot of honey because they're better bees. It's that simple. And so, therefore, I don't believe that myth that it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven is true. That's a complicated statement. I hope I got it right. It's my second life I'm living through. But I don't know. I really do think I was put here for a purpose. Now I know it's bordering on sanctimoniousness. You know, I get that, but it doesn't matter what you think. All that matters is what I think about me. At the end of the day, I have to live with me, not you. Think about the trouble I have. So Craig Smith writes this. He says, a camel can go through the eye of a needle. However, it must change its molecular structure. That is what Jesus was saying. We all have to change to see that God loves us, and then in receiving that love, we enter the kingdom of heaven. At least that is how I have always seen that scripture. Jesus was pals with Zacchaeus, the chief tax collector, who was rich and hated by everyone. But when Jesus visited his house, Zacchaeus changed and gave to help people and restored all he cheated people out of. That he changed, that is why Jesus said, today the kingdom has come to the house of Zacchaeus. Just a thought. It's very interesting. Christian charity does not come from the air. It comes from the teachings. And that is why it's a beautiful religion. And that's why the religions that I keep hammering on this show, Judaism and Christianity, which are the founding religions of America, must not be pushed aside for some retrograde throwback view of the world, lest we all be cast into a cauldron. Period. End of story. No more to be said on that one. You know, when you think out loud, you got to think out loud. And so we'll go back to the big myth of today, which is the myth that I'm talking about, the myth of toxic masculinity and why man needs myths. I mean, I could tie it into, I know where your mind is going. If you're a close follower of me, as some of you are, and you listen to every word and then try to trip me up in your own head, it's become a national sport. It's better than chess. Is to listen to this guy who thinks he's so smart and then try to trip him up in your head because you're such a grave intellectual in your own mind that you've already caught me in one or two complex problems, haven't you? Wrong. You're probably saying, wait a minute, Savage, you're talking about the myth of the Salem witch hunt. How can I believe that God is not a myth? How can I believe that the flood in Noah is not a myth? How can I believe that the idea of a Hercules is not a myth? Even though even Hercules is not in the Bible, I'm giving an example. So how many of the biblical stories are purely mythological? I don't know. I wasn't there. But I will say this, mythology is not a lie. Mythology is our form of novelistic poetry. It is what it is. In a way, I learned when I was studying anthropology many years ago that folklore and folk tales are in many ways, they become truths. Folklore and folk tales become truths because we as a human species, we as a human animal, need myths. I don't know that dogs need myths. I don't know if cats need myths. I don't know if elephants need myths. But I know this, we as thinking animals need myths. And so I'll continue to talk about the myth of toxic masculinity, which is being pushed by man-hating, anti-family, godless, feminist fascists today, being done not so much because they want to purify the human race, but because of plain old greed, rivalry, avarice, intolerance, and the desire to take over whole industries, whole universities, and the mind of the American people. And I guess I should take a spot of a pause right now. How does that work? A spot of a pause. You can't really take a spot of a pause. A pause of a spot. So let's begin with, I don't know if I should do this. Can I start about I didn't say the myth now, don't get me wrong. I'm going to give you the historical facts that we know to be true about Jesus. I mean, there are facts that we know. And I'm not trying to merge or confuse you by talking about theology and history. I'm talking about what we know historically. We know that Jesus appeared in Judea during the reign of Tiberius Caesar. We can all agree on that, correct? That we all know. We also know that Jesus was a prophet. We also know he was a preacher in the fashion of the Jewish prophets of the time. We know he was a man of about 30. We don't know much more about him. And our only direct source of information about Jesus, his life, and his teachings are the four Gospels. And so, where do we go from there? Well, we can then jump to, who is Gautama Buddha? Is he real? There was a Gautama Buddha, but who he actually was has been obscured by the fat little figure that we see in the Buddha figures. We don't know who he was, and the idols of later Buddhism, we don't know who he is. Maybe he was a lean and athletic man. So we don't know what these men looked like. We know pretty much when Jesus walked the earth. We know he is the person upon whom the religion of Christianity is based. We know that he was a penniless teacher who wandered about Judea, living upon handouts of food, and yet he was so influential that 1 billion people on earth practiced the religion of Christianity. But is there a myth attached to any of this? I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I know the truth. I do know that weak and sick people were healed and given confidence by his presence. We know that. He gave people a lot of faith. And he went about the country of Judea for 3 years talking about his doctrine. Then he came to Jerusalem. And what happened in Jerusalem? He was accused of trying to set up a strange kingdom in Judea. He was tried upon this charge. He was crucified together with 2 thieves. And so we talk about Christianity today in a mythological way. How much of it is real? How much of it is false is up to you to decide. And does it really matter? Does it really matter how much of religion is mythology? Doesn't it matter that religion brings a moral platform and a moral idea to a society? What would society be like if there was no religion at all? Tell me what it would be like. Tell me where there's a pure society, where there is no guidance, no morality. And you'll say, well, communism. How'd that work out for the Soviets? Where the pigs at the top of the political hierarchy were the ones who lived like the pharaohs of ancient times. Everyone else was made to live like the slaves of modern times. I don't know what happens after you die, nor do I pretend to have such knowledge. And I know that religious people have various opinions on the matter. Even within the same religion, some believe in an afterlife, some don't. Some believe life stops when a person's body dies. Some believe there's an eternal heaven. Some don't, and they're still religious. And that's why it's such a diverse marketplace of ideas. And it actually is respectful to believe we live in a nation where so many different ideas can live next to each other without anger. While in the fanatical throwback Islamist world, if you don't believe the way they believe, what do they do to people? They kill them. And that's why they're such a danger to our society and should never, ever have been allowed into this nation. There should be a litmus test of religion in the country, and I'll say it again. If you hold throwback 8th century religious beliefs and you are let into this country, you should be found out and deported from this nation, because you cannot bring 8th century views to this nation of ours and hope to survive here, because there's going to be a clash like you've never seen. Running people over, shooting people in workplaces. You know where that's coming from. It's coming from the hatred that they have in their hearts from their 8th century view of the world. Trump tried. He's trying very hard to stop the flood of illegal aliens, especially those with 7th and 8th century views. And every day we wake up another psychotic throwback judge of the type in San Francisco that turned over again. There has to be a cleaning of the house of judges in America. There has to be a purge of these fanatical left-wing dictators who think that they're more powerful than the people. They are not more powerful than the people. And the day should come that the judges are purged in this country. That's all I can say on that issue without going any further, because you know where I'm going. That's all there is to it. And if you find that blasphemous, good. Good, because you judges deserve it. The stench from your bench is making us all clench. And you are not supporting Western civilization. You are distorting Western civilization. If you let bums defecate in the streets of San Francisco and call that freedom of speech, then you, my friends, are psychotic. No matter how high you may have climbed on the liberal totem pole, no matter how high you may have climbed in the liberal legal world, you are lower than the lowest of the low. And that's all I want to say on that. So I don't know that I even want to do any more of this right now. I think I've given it to you. I think I'll talk about the type of alcohol that you're going to drink, because the type of alcohol that you drink determines whether you become merry or maudlin, according to a study published and posted in The Guardian by Nicola Davis. Because what you drink affects your mind. They're not all the same. 53% of participants said drinking red wine made them feel relaxed. Same with beer. White wine, 33%. But spirits, hard liquor, were linked to feelings of confidence by just over 59% and sexiness by over 42%. But hard liquor, spirits, were more likely to be linked to negative feelings, including tearfulness, with almost 48% of participants saying drinking hard liquor made them feel ill. Nearly 30% made them aggressive. 60% of participants said they linked red wine to feeling tired. I can attest to that. While white wine is the drink least often linked to tearfulness. And only 10% of drinkers saying they associated white wine with becoming weepy. By and large, spirits are having a stronger relationship in pretty well all of the outcomes, apart from those associated with red wine. Yeah, I found that myself. I brought back a case of very expensive red wine from L.A., because I would never drink it in the summertime. I can't tolerate it. I know about the sulfites. Don't call on it, please. I wrote the book. But come the cold weather, I like to drink red wine. So I brought back a very expensive Bordeaux, 1995, this and that. And I really liked it, but I was getting so exhausted from it, wiped out, exhausted. Can't drink it. It's a shame. I can't drink it. I have to give it away now. So, yeah, the answer is what? Don't drink it all? Trump doesn't drink it all. Give him credit for that, by the way. Is he the first president in American history who's not drinker? Was there one before? Like someone I don't know about? He doesn't drink. Can't you give him credit for something? No, that's not good. That's not good enough. So that's what we're talking about. The myth of this, the myth of that. Man needs myths. We have myths. Thanksgiving's a myth. The Pilgrims and the Indians, they got along. They got along great. The invaders came and stole the land, and they got along great. Picture if you were a Native American. We know they're imperfect. There's no such thing as the noble savage. They know what they did. They did the best they could as tribal people. They developed their own physical culture, their own social order, their own music, art, poetry, their own primitive science. They certainly had survival skills that exceed those of ours. Living off the land is not something you can easily dismiss. That's a science unto itself that the Native Americans developed to the highest possible level of knowledge. It's something I've been fascinated with since I'm a little boy myself, going all the way back to birch bark trees up in the Catskill Mountains and making little boats out of them. I was always amazed at people who knew how to use the natural products that we find around ourselves for survival and such. Okay, so the Native American led a life that was very hard, developed it into a very high art form, and they were quite brutal to each other. You think of gangs in inner cities in America today. Now magnify that by 1,000-fold. They didn't just kill each other with an axe. If they captured a man, a brave, from another tribe, they would take him back to their village and torture him to death. Skin him alive, take his skin off him, and throw him out in the snow without skin. No, just so you know a little bit about the reality instead of the Currier and Ives view. Okay, so now you take these tribal people, as advanced as they were in some ways and as brutal as they could be in another. Now you have the invaders arrive on their little wooden ships from God knows where, they're like from the moon, with weird outfits, with steel axes and guns, and they steal your land. They arrive up from nowhere and they steal your land. They start hunting your animals. They hunt your deer. They hunt your turkey. They hunt your bear. I don't know what else they were eating. Who knows? Now, would you like them in your backyard? No, that's the nature of the world. That's the way it's always been. All nations were built upon colonization and bloodshed. There is not any. See, this is the myth that needs to be explored. It's like America's a this nation, a racist nation, a that nation, compared with what? In a vacuum, it's an imperfect nation. But compared with what nation? What nation on earth was not forged in blood and forged in blood? Murder. I don't know the nation. It doesn't exist. Every nation on earth was forged in blood. That was the mother's milk of the nation, was blood. So you say, America's a brutal nation. Well, yeah, that's why you're here, you moron. That's why you have the ability to put it down. Because it was such a brutal nation that a putz like you, sitting in a university, gets the ability to put it down and nothing happens to you. You collect a big fat check and go home and tell the world how bad a country is. They let an idiot like you make a living. If it was a really brutal nation, you'd be thrown out of the university for hating the country. But it isn't really a brutal nation. It's a very tolerant nation, and that's why it's going to fall. This nation is so tolerant that I don't know how it can survive. The war upon men is so vicious right now that the enemies of America are laughing at us. What are you going to do, undermine the military? Undermine the warrior culture of the military so they can't even go out and fight the enemy? Is that what you want? Yes, that's what the Internationale wants. Of course that's what they want. You don't see the long lineage of this war against men, do you? No, that's why I'm paid to do talk radio, because I do. I'm going down an inspirational path, and I'm not coming back. Because God's already pushed me down the road. God led me here. There are people who can do news shows. God bless them. But they can't do this show. Only I can do it. Well, I'm one of the few, not the only. There are people who do it. But that's where I'm going. I have a whole vision for this. An inspirational show. I learned from a mystical Jewish teacher that the man who is not religious, the man who does not go to church or synagogue every day, but the man who actually feels God is in some ways more religious than the man who pretends through the rituals to feel God, or seeks to feel God through the rituals and doesn't feel him. And he said, if you feel him, that you are, in many ways, more spiritually aware than they are. And that's not knocking the man who prays 3 times a day. I so respect you guys. You know, my grandfather Samuel is buried in Queens, New York. And I had 2 rabbis who were in New York. I said, would you go to my grandfather's grave, and would you make a prayer over his grave? I just was feeling this strongly. And they could not find Samuel's grave, who we call the astronaut of the family. He came over as an immigrant from Russia without a penny in his pocket. He worked until he had a heart attack and died. And then along came my father. My father was an immigrant. So, I never met my grandfather, but I wanted them to make a prayer for him and to thank him. And they couldn't find him in the cemetery. They couldn't find the grave. And then at the end of the second day, they found it, and they sent me a picture. It was so overwhelming to me to see this gravestone in this old cemetery. I can't even describe what it did to me. But they made the prayer over that grave. But what I'm saying to you is this, and I'll say it so people finally hear me. Although I myself am not a very religious man, it is the religious people amongst us who keep the whole shebang going. Were it not for the religious people, we would have nothing. We would have lost God a long time ago. And I want to thank every religious person listening to this show for what they do every day to keep God alive in our society and in our hearts. Well, I respect religious Christians. I respect religious Jews. I really have always been drawn to very religious people, and I found that in my own life that's not me because I've tried it. I can't do it. But here's my point. If it was not for religious Jews, Judaism would have disappeared a long time ago. And if it was not for religious Christians, Christianity would have gone the way of Denmark or Sweden, where it doesn't exist at all. It's nothing. It's a social organization that pushes far left practices. So yes, thank God for religious people because they keep the religion alive. And that is why very religious people have to be supported by the rest of us. They are the people that keep the tapestry of religion alive. Otherwise, the tapestry would be gone. And really, that's my last word on it. If it was not for the, quote, fanatics, there'd be no religion at all. Well, let me tell you something. The people who are super sensitive are having a rough time right now living in this world. The slaughter of the animals, the slaughter of societies, the ignorance of the people, the hatred of the people for decency. It's a very hard time to be living in the world. Leo Tolstoy wrote somewhere that those who believe their religion is greater than God will believe that their sect is greater than their religion and end up by believing that they are greater than their sect. That's on page 225 in my book in the section called Rabbi in a Brothel, a Fable. Leo, I like that. No, I wrote that in the 1980s. I incorporated pieces of my early writings in here that were written when I was actually a better writer than I am now. I had a lot of time on my hands. And I incorporated some of my early writings when I was really rebellious towards the world, and my mind was so active. And it's in there, The Room with a View to Eternity. I like that one. That's where Henry is buried. And he says, we never know we're going to die. He reminded me with a 70s rocker's cackle and grin. That's such a good line. I remember burying Henry. Burial is heavy. People don't even... most people today... here's a difference in California and New York that I noticed. When I grew up in New York, wherever you drove, there was a cemetery. LIE, cemeteries, Catholic, this and that. Everywhere you turned. I can name them all coming out of New York, coming out of the tunnel or over a bridge. Calvary Cemetery, right out of the bridge, I once had a car that broke down there at night. That was creepy. I don't even go to New York anymore. It's funny. Do I miss it? I miss the memory of New York. I don't miss the being pushed off the subway platform part of the New York of today. I don't miss the homeless with box cutters part of New York of today. I don't miss the anti-white hatred of the New York of today. I kind of have a black and white memory of New York when my mother could walk to the corner to Deitch Dairy with a little roller thing and get some groceries at 10 o'clock at night and no one touched her. That kind of time when the police were all powerful, big strapping cops with nightsticks. If you looked at them the wrong way, they took you behind the station and gave you a shellacking. They kept the kids in line. That New York. The one I'm talking about. You got to get a memory of that one. So, you can't go home again. I'm home. Wherever I am, I'm home. I'm wherever I am, I'm home. It doesn't matter where I am. I'm home. I'm the same person wherever I am. As long as the air is clean, and I should fill in the rest, but I can't. It's a family show. As long as the air isn't clean, I'm good. But you were reminded that it's pretty brief, the whole short dance in the sun. You know what I'm saying? You couldn't get too far away from a funeral on the highways of New York with the line of cars. You were reminded. Yeah, they went out to the burial grounds. You were reminded, that eventually for whom the bell tolls, the bell tolls for thee. You're reminded. California, I don't even know where the cemeteries are. They're hidden, especially in L.A., hidden. No one dies in L.A. Everyone lives forever. The land of the eternal smile, the land of the shiny white teeth, the land of the perennial tan, the land of the man in 80 years of age with the long head of hair, the land of eternity, not. Because at the end of the day, it's the way of all flesh.
Susie Orman here, and I have a very special message for all federal employees affected by the government shutdown. This will be the first time in the history of my entire career that I am telling anybody to even consider this. But if you don't have the money to pay your bills, then you might want to consider taking a loan from your retirement account. You can listen to more on a very special bonus episode of the Women in Money podcast. Free now at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.